in the philosophy schools around the time of the Dominican Franciscan developments going on, right, in the universities, they would discuss all kinds of things that seemed like to make not much of sense to us now, or seemed to be a question like, what does it even mean? Why would you even wonder about that now? But one of the things, and I say this because Aristotle, remember, they're addressing some challenges, right? Aristotle was a big one. Later on in the church, there were other challenges that we dealt with, sometimes well, sometimes not, right? But one of the questions was, what is the prime faculty of the human soul? Well, now, when you think of the soul, that's a question. What is the prime faculty of the human soul? Now, when we think of soul, don't think about that ghosty part of you that leaves when you die. Right? Don't think of soul like that. But think of soul as whatever it is that makes us human, and not, a goat or something, right? What do we have that makes us different from other, what they call sentient beings, right? Beings that can feel and sense and so on. So what makes us different? And they said, and I'm summarizing this very brief, right? But there are three faculties of the human soul: memory, intellect, and will. Okay, the three faculties of human: memory, intellect, and will. Now, when we look at all beings, memory, intellect, and will, animals have memory. Goats have memory. I'm using a goat because it's hard to be affectionate toward a goat, right? It could say puppies or kittens, but they get all messed up with thinking about that. So animals have memory, but they do not have intellect, as we understand it. They don't have a will, right? They have instinct, they have drives, right? And as much as you think your cat loves you, your cat does not love you. Stop feeding your cat and have your neighbor start feeding your cat, and you'll see where the love goes.
You mean animals aren't capable of loving humans?
Not love the way...
Well, it can't be the same, but it's still demonstrated by licking you and coming to hug you and all that.
I hate to burst your bubble, but your dog licks other things besides you. That has nothing to do with love. Sorry. That's on video too, right? So getting back to the faculties of the human soul, memory, intellect, and will. While they said it's going to be between the intellect and the will, all right, the intellect and the will, and so now I'll kind of short circuit to the end and then kind of map out this. And if you're taking notes, I'll do it in a way that you can sort of track things, okay? But basically, the Thomistic school says that the intellect is the prime faculty of the human soul. And the Franciscan school says it is the will that is the prime faculty of the human soul. Now, so what? What does that mean? Now, if you're drawing a line in your notes, and if you're not, just kind of follow me. The intellect. What does the intellect do? What is the activity of the intellect? And that is to know. The activity of the intellect is to know. And the goal, the end, the aim of it, the intellect knows truth. Okay, you're kind of tracking that, right? The job of the role of the kind of function of the intellect is to know, and it ends with truth. The will, the activity of the will is to desire. And the goal, the end of what is desired is love. And here, love is meant as a noun, not as a verb. Okay, oh, a little trick there. Ooh, right? So in other words, you say, so the intellect knows truth, the will desires love. Okay, so that's kind of describing what each one does, right? Now, the Dominicans would say the intellect is primary because its goal, so to speak, is truth. And truth is unchanging. Truth is given to you. Truth is just there. And so our minds are geared toward truth, so to speak. And if we want to grow more fully human, then we have to work harder and harder to know the truth. And the truth is so beautiful that once you know it, of course you're going to want it. So for the job of the Dominican then is to help people to know the truth. Okay? If you listen to a lot of popular preachers today, it's all about teaching others the truth. Because you're probably in error. And if you are in some kind of error, my job is to correct you so that your mistake is fixed and now you know the truth. Because once you know the truth, then it will be beautiful and you will be happy. To know the truth. And the truth is unchanging. Okay? So the job of a religious leader, a priest, is to know the truth more and more and more, to be really good at knowing the truth so that you can teach it to others, so they can come upon it, right? Almost all of the catechesis that you have received, me too, was geared toward learning the truth. How many persons in the Trinity? Why did God make you? What is the church? What is the sacrament, right? And there's an answer. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Unfortunately, what do we do with kids in faith formation in the parishes? Right? You got to learn your catechism. Learn. And I am all in favor of that. I teach now. I've been doing more teaching now in my 27th year of priesthood than I have in my whole life. I'm loving it. Right? So I have nothing against learning and teaching. But our formation, our faith formation, has all been geared to learning more about the faith, learning more about Jesus, about the Bible. We learn all this stuff. And the Dominicans would say, see, that's good. Because you're being cleansed of error and drawn more deeply into the truth. The Franciscans would say, as important as truth is static, which means there's nothing dynamic about it. It's there, we're here, we just get it. Love is dynamic. Understand the difference between static and dynamic, right? Love is dynamic. And desire is what moves you from where you were to where you're going. So you can know the truth, but not necessarily love the truth. You can know the truth, but not desire it. Franciscans would say, because the activity of the will is dynamic, and it leads us to love, which is dynamic, that has a capacity to change us. And so that's why the will is the prime faculty of the soul. Well, the Dominicans would say, how do you know if what you're desiring is really love? because it's possible to desire that which is not loving. It's possible to desire falsehood. So they'd say that's why the truth is more important. Franciscans would say, Jesus, who says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, points to the Father. And the Father is love. God the Father is love. Notice, we don't say he is loving. Love is not an activity of God. Love is God. Love is not something God does. Love is who God is.
So is love more important than truth?
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Bottom line, if you're a Franciscan, love is more important than truth.
And the Dominican?
Truth is more important than love.
And Jesuit?
Actually, the Jesuits are very much Thomists. We're talking during break about how what happened to Thomas Aquinas, because he was banned. Thomas Aquinas wrote this beautiful summary of theology as a textbook for seminarians called the Summa Theologiae, right? Which is a summary of theology. 4 volumes. We might even have a version of it here. Is there a copy of the Summa up there, anybody? There'd be 4 volumes of the same book next to each other.
Is it St. Augustine?
No, St. Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, he's real complicated.
Yeah, well, just wait till you get to Thomas.
Oh,
Yeah. And so what happened was, Thomas wrote this, this sort of like what we would now call a textbook, but volumes to train seminarians. Right? Aquinas stayed in the university. Bonaventure was just talking about this during break. Bonaventure had to leave the university to be Minister General of the Franciscan Order for 17 years. So he continued to write, but he was not writing for the university. He was not writing for the academy. So it wasn't like he was in a pure classroom situation. His situation was life with the friars. And so when he wrote, he was writing from within that. So he didn't write textbooks. His was more poetic, in his style. Again, in a medieval style. So if you read them, it sounds a little clunky, but to get through that, you can see. So Thomas Aquinas, for example, in his great Summa, there was a way of teaching that Thomas didn't invent, but Thomas and Bonaventure both studied under this way. It was called disputed questions. Questiones disputantes, right? Disputed questions. It was a way of teaching. And the way it worked was something like this. We have a proposition. God is 3 divine persons in one perfect unity. Okay? And let's say that as a proposition. That's what God is. Now, the way disputed questions work would be, some say this is true because of this, and they'll give maybe 4 reasons why people say this is true. Others say it's not true, and these will be arguments against these 4 reasons. Right? So reason 1 is this, but the opposition to reason 1 is here. Well, okay, and reason 2 is this. This is my answer to reason 2. So you end up with a wash. Right? So now it looks even. So Thomas says, so some say this, and this. Others say against that, and that. But I say this is the reason why. So it's not one of the 4. So here's my reason why I think this is true. Then after that, here are some reasons why people would say I'm wrong. A, B, C, and D. But here's my answer to their A, B, C, and D. Therefore, I'm right. It sounds complicated. It's more organized than you think, but it's a way, it's disputed questions. So if you want to have an argument with Thomas Aquinas, he's got 16 points to his argument. 4 points in favor of the old position, 4 points against the old position, his position, and then 4 points against his position, and 4 defenses of his position. You see what I'm doing here, right? So for any idea, you've got 16 points around that. Why it makes sense, doesn't make sense, how this is different from that, and so on. And you have 4 volumes of this. And you just don't pick up Aquinas and say, I think I'll read chapter 13 in Aquinas tonight, and your brain turns to mush. But it was like a catechism. It was for training seminarians, right? And if somebody wants to argue with you, he's got the answer. So Aquinas was, he was the mainstay in the universities until after a couple hundred years he was suppressed. He was actually silenced. Not him personally, but all his books. Forbidden to read it, don't study it, burn as many as you can, don't teach it, don't nothing about it. The Franciscan and then the Augustinian schools dominated. And then when philosophy in Europe, especially after the Council of Trent and the rise of the Jesuits came around, and people felt, no, we need a more systematic response to the Protestant challenge. It's called the Counter-Reformation. Have you heard of that? Right? So to counter what was happening in the Reform. And the Jesuits were a counter-Reformation, where they were founded in order to respond to the Protestant Reformation. Right? They're later than Franciscans. In fact, some people have said, if Martin Luther, who was an Augustinian, by the way, he was an Augustinian priest, if Martin Luther were a Franciscan instead of an Augustinian, we just would have had one more Franciscan order. All right. So anyway, so you got so you have a kind of a return to Thomas Aquinas after the Reformation, so that by the time you get to the 1700s, for sure, by the time you get to the 1700s, everybody's like all on board with Aquinas, right? Because he's so systematic. And by Vatican I, which is in the 1800s, they wanted to restore Thomas Aquinas. So there's this big push. And, the Jesuits were among them, the Dominicans, of course, too, saying, we need to restore him. So he was a big deal in Vatican I. And in Vatican II, they still say, oh, by the way, we still love Thomas, right? So that's, and so really, all of our catechisms, all of our stuff are all in Thomistic language, right? Which borrows heavily, exclusively in categories by Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and had everything in certain categories. So all of Christian faith was sort of explained to you through categories of Aristotelian philosophy. You didn't know that that's what you were learning, but you were. Because like I said, like the fish is in water. We were breathing Aristotle. Didn't even know it. But there was this whole other approach that kind of got sidelined, and that is the Franciscan approach. The primacy of the will over the primacy of the intellect means we grow as humans, we grow as Christians, the more we are able to love or come to desire love. So where a Dominican would say, as long as you are learning truth, more and more truth, coming to clearly understand truth, the closer you are to God, who is, Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Franciscan would say, the more you come to desire love, I know love is the noun, right? Love is the object of our desire. The more we train our desire to focus on what is loving, there we will come closer to God. Yes, there's a place for understanding truth. The ultimate truth being that God is love. Right? Yes?
But our faith is mainly, it's based on faith, because nothing can be proven.
Correct. Right? All of this is under the umbrella of faith.
I know.
Right. So whether you're Dominican or Franciscan or Augustinian or whatever, it's all under faith. But it's a matter of emphasis, I guess I'd say. It's not like the Dominicans are wrong and we're right, or vice versa. Just to say, there are different ways, different voices within the church, within our history, that we can claim as saying, this is what makes sense for me. This is how I grow closer to the Lord. And as Franciscans, we are carriers of this great tradition that has really been set aside by the church, and unfortunately set aside by the orders, because we were all, the friars that are like Father Bird and Father Sergius, and even Father Tony's age, the older friars, They didn't know anything about St. Francis, let alone St. Bonaventure. I mean, Sergius said one of the biggest experiences, one of the biggest like spiritual highlights of his life after years in the order was finally discovering who St. Francis is. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? With our men coming in, we started with St. Francis. For them, Franciscan was a style of being a priest. We wore brown instead of black. Bonaventure was somebody, he wrote a couple of interesting things in the Middle Ages, we read them, but Thomas Aquinas was all the philosophy, all the theology they studied was all Thomistic. Right? So there's in the last couple of decades, been a real return to the Franciscan tradition. So, focusing on the primacy of desire and love doesn't turn us again into hippies with sandals, just lollygagging through the poppy fields, right? As attractive as that might seem sometimes, right? Isn't what that means. Instead, there is a particular image of love that is given to us through our tradition. Love isn't, like I said in the Mass, love is not the happy feeling you get in your heart when you're feeling, a flutter in the face of your beloved or something like that, right? Love is a very particular thing, and it's related to the dogma, the central dogma of the whole Christian faith, which is the dogma of the Trinity. The dogma of the Trinity. Even our catechism now says the central dogma of all of Christian faith is the Trinity. Every teaching about God flows from that starting point. Trinity. And a Franciscan understanding of the Trinity doesn't need Aristotle's philosophical concepts to explain it the way Thomas does. Instead, the Franciscan teaching on the Trinity has to do very much with a word that comes from St. Paul in the Greek, worth writing down, this is key, and that is kenosis, 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 which means self-emptying. The word kenosis comes from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians. Though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he emptied himself, taking on human likeness, and so on, right? Remember that from the Philippians hymn, right? Jesus did not cling to godliness. Rather, he emptied himself. Now that image of emptying yourself is what I want you to cling to, because that reveals not only what Jesus did, but it reveals the dynamic of the Blessed Trinity itself.
What do you mean by empty yourself? He became human?
Becoming human. He didn't cling to godliness, but he took on human flesh. That is an emptying.
But he didn't separate the humanness and the divinity.
They are united in Christ. Precisely because the inner dynamic, this is where you get kind of mystical, right? Because the inner dynamic within God is kenosis. The Father loving the Son, and the Son loving the Father. Each one in an act of self-emptying, other orientation. Right? I'm using my hands a lot. I'm not Italian, but sometimes you just need this, right? Mm-hmm. Self-emptying has to do with this, to sort of gush out of yourself toward some other.
So the other one could enter into the other one?
Exactly. So that because if you have a lover and a beloved, what is the response of the beloved? To love back. And so the Father and the Son loving each other so fully that that love itself becomes its own person.
They become one.
And that love, that person, which is love in the Trinity, is the Spirit. St. Augustine used the metaphor of a family. You have a husband and a wife. They get married. and they can talk about their marriage as its own separate thing, can't you? So I can say, how are you doing, Tina? And you could say, I'm doing okay, a little busy, students are on my mind, but I'm otherwise okay. You know, been better, but okay. I can say, how's Bob? All things being considered, fine, but he's still struggling with some of his, physical limitations, and so a lot of times he's not in a good space. So how's your marriage? Our marriage is great. So you talk about your marriage as its own thing, right? My marriage is wonderful. Even though I personally am only okay, my spouse is really kind of not okay right now, but our marriage is its own thing. Or vice versa. You can say we have a good marriage, and we're both doing well too. Or vice versa. You can say we're both doing well, but our marriage is terrible. Right? You can do that. Right? And it's an analogy, right? So it's not perfect, but it kind of gives you a picture. And then to go along with Augustine, the marriage then, which is the love between the husband and the wife, then issues forth in a child, which is the physical outward manifestation of this love, right? And so that's how the love in the marriage actually acquires a personhood in the child. Okay, now that's an analogy to marriage, and our experience of marriage now isn't the same as it was then, but it's an analogy. So this love between Father and Son and Spirit exists before there's any creation at all. And that says that within God, these three persons, not people, three persons is the difference. These three persons exist in eternal relationship. They exist in eternal community. Within God is community. And so therefore, when God creates, that is a sort of a gushing forth from within God out into something that is not God. Right? Because creation, there's God and there's creation. The creation is not God. So that creation can love God back. You're saying, right? The lover and the beloved. Now, God gushing out of himself, so to speak, right? I'm using mystical language. It's not all like, all drawing lines here, but God sort of gushing out of himself to create something that is not God, that God can love, so that that creation can love God back. And everything gets drawn back into God. Right? Sorry?
God doesn't need nothing, but he just wants our love.
Right, because God created out of love, not out of necessity.
But he wants us. I think he gets lonely if we don't.
Well, no, he doesn't get lonely. No, don't think about God being lonely. Yeah, God's not your puppy. God wants us to love him, but God creates out of love, out of God's own will. And that's why Franciscans say the primacy of the human soul is the will, because God willed, desired creation. God didn't have to. Intellectually, God was perfect in himself. God's truthfulness remains true whether God had created or not.
Well, what was behind all the desires?
Love. I'm saying love. It's love. In other words, the nature of love is two things. This is what God reveals to us. Love has two qualities. The fact that God chose to love at all. God didn't have to. God did not have to love a creation. God didn't have to create. God is love, right? But God did not have to create. God created out of love. So the choice, the act of will to create is already one side. And the other thing is all love, and by definition to be love, must be free. Freely given. God was absolutely free to love or not to love. To create, to create or not create. I shouldn't say to love or not. God was absolutely free to create or not to create. God chose to create. He used his choice, his desire, right? Remember, the will desires love. God desires love back. That's what God wants. And God created freely, could have decided not to, but chose freely, chose to love so that he would be loved back. And all of creation then is yearning to love God back. Again though, for love to be love, it has to be free. Yes.
Yeah, a question for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If God is only love,
Mm-hmm.
and he created us,
Mm-hmm.
at our basis, then are we, he's not going to create something that's not love. So in our basic being, are we totally love, and it's just through original sin that all that comes?
Oh, I'm glad you're getting into original sin, because that'd be my next step.
But
That has to,
basically we're love.
the answer is yes, once we understand that love is free. So in other words, God, in a sense, took a risk. God took a risk with us. Because he created us out of love, in his divine image and likeness, which is love. We are created for love, in our inmost being. Because God's inmost being is love. Right? If God is love, we're created in the image and likeness of God. We're created for love as well. Here's the caveat. Love has to be free to be love. If it's forced, it's not love, is it? If it's forced, it is not love, by definition. And so, God, there's one thing God cannot do. Not will not, cannot do. He cannot force love. Although he creates out of love, love has to be free. And so God cannot force his creation to love him back. And at some point, there was a moment in his creation that did not.
Boy, this world's in a big mess.
Well, yes and no. Because now we get to the beautiful, we got a couple hundred years to go left. Because if we focus on the brokenness, we miss the original intention of God, the original desire of God. There is original sin, but sin is not the origin of everything that exists. When we talk about original sin, we mean the origin of sin in human history. But the origin of everything that exists comes before there was sin. The origin of everything that exists is love. So the Franciscans will focus on original grace.
Father, I'm getting a little lost here. I'm a Franciscan. You said this is the Franciscan ideals. Can you bring in like some of the writings or sayings of Francis, how this became Franciscan? I'm trying to relate it to
Yes,
my...
sure. Very good. So, because I'm in the world of Bonaventure and Scotus now, right? A couple hundred years after, but so it's good. So let's cook it down to the instinct of Francis, because Francis was an intuitive, right? He got everything he's got. He was a poet. He was the hippie walking in the poppy fields, right? Bonaventure and Scotus are the book writers, right? But the original intuition that they got from Francis is God's love. God's goodness, God's grace, God's presence everywhere in creation.
God in Jesus or God as the Trinity?
Well,
Because Francis says Jesus.
Francis didn't explicitly use Trinity language.
Yeah, I know.
And so, but he didn't use very many theological terms. He talked about things that later on he said, oh, the theological term that describes this is this. So, for example, he would not, or seldom, if I have to look in the writings for sure, but the word incarnation. Right, the Word becoming flesh. Right, it's a dogma of the church. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The eternal Word, second person of the Trinity, taking flesh within the order of creation. You had a theological structure for explaining all this. And Bonaventure was one of the ones to say, you know, we have this Franciscan instinct, and there is a way of making sense of it, because, you know, Thomas Aquinas, he's got this whole, you know, 4 volumes of how everything works with everything, right? And Bonaventure wasn't going to do that way. But he did have to provide some kind of structure. He can't be just like this, you know, medieval hippie floating around the poppy fields, right? You got to use your brain a little bit, right? Now, so Francis would talk, you know, brother sun, sister moon, brother fire, sister water, right? He wasn't praising the water itself, but how God is revealed in the water. He wasn't, you know, adoring the sun as if the sun were God, but the sun was a reminder of God, right? Everything that existed reminded him of God, right? Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders that Jesus was with him, and along the way with him, he wanted to be more and more like that. This idea of kenosis, right? This self-emptying. Francis never used the word kenosis in his writings, but there was no saint in the history of the church that was ever as self-emptying as Francis, right? Who wanted to die not only without any clothes, but he died without his own will, right? You know the story about him dying, Brother Elias saying, oh yeah, he wants to die naked? No, give him a habit. And that's when Francis realized, now I have nothing because I don't even have my own will. I think there's no more self-emptying saint than St. Francis. Never used the word kenosis. Right? But his life has been a life of continually letting go. Letting go of what kept him from God. And that's what kenosis is. That's that letting go. Letting go. When he talks about poverty, you know, the vows that we say, you know, as in the first ordering way, we don't say, I take a vow of poverty. We say, sine propria, without anything of my own. We don't say paupertas. We say sine propria, which means without appropriating. Because to appropriate is this gesture, isn't it? I have to talk using my arms again. You know, words already up, right? This is appropriation. This is self-emptying. God does not appropriate except that he wants his creation to return to him lovingly and freely.
So Father, when we die, what do we take with us?
Nothing.
Do we take our intellect, don't we, and our will?
No.
Well, okay, what thing do you take? It's your soul has a memory, intellect, and will, and then eventually at the end of time, your body will come back to you too.
And Francis is all we had for our sins.
Well,
What was that term? I can't recall it now.
because he wanted people to keep from being arrogant. Again, he's a poet. He's not a theologian, right? So maybe that's the difference. So we look back at the life of Francis, and we say his intuition that he had about how to relate to God. Later on, theological reflection leads to these other things, right? There's more theological ways, which gives rise to the intellectual tradition. That's why I say, we're side by side with the Dominicans in terms of an intellectual life, and there are consequences to this, right down the line. Because if we say the will is the prime faculty of the human soul, somebody might say, well, why? Well, because we believe that's what God is about, within God's self. And we know that through creation. If God had never chosen to create, God would have remained perfect truth, but nobody would have known about it because God would not have created a creation that was called to love him back. And since we're part of creation, our purpose is to lead all of creation back into God, out of love, to freely choose that. And the way to do that is to unite ourselves with that little pinpoint of the pinpoint of creation which did it perfectly. That was Jesus. Jesus is that little speck of all of creation that did it. And because it happened in Jesus, we know it's complete. Not in time, but in eternity. And so that's why once we start focusing on Jesus, now we see an example of what it means to love. Because love is not just any old thing. That's where we stop being hippies and we start being, serious. Because love, like in the gospel tape, perfect gospel, couldn't have planned it. Love is not the happy sentiment when your puppy licks your face. Love is when it gets hard. Love is when you set aside what is your own clinginess for the sake of the betterment of somebody else. That's what love is. And how do we know that? Because that's what Jesus showed us, and that's what St. Francis showed us, who didn't cling to anything. Position, power, roles, money, his own clothes, his own desires. He let go of everything. And it was hard for him. And it's hard for us. You know, as a Franciscan, I don't have any money, really. I get my allowance, that's it. But I cannot cling to any position. You know, one time I was, some of you have seen my parish when I was in Cleveland. I talk about that from time to time. It was a big, fancy church, and it was famous, and, it was like that kind of church. Not there. If I lived some other life, I could have held on to that. Right? And a part of me wanted to hold on to it. And I was told no. There you go.
You got us.
And I got you. Yeah. Worthy trade. Worthy trade. So I'm not trying to, make myself sound like some kind of saint, because, man, it was hard. Sometimes it still is hard. But you do it.
Wear your cross.
Well, no, you don't. I got heavier crosses than you. But I know it's so when Franciscans are saying, that there's the primacy of love, that we shoot toward, then we have a model, a specific pattern for what that is. And that is the self-emptying love of God, which has its origin in the Trinity and is most clearly expressed in the life of Jesus. And when we conform ourselves to that more and more, then we are more and more godly, and we are more and more human at the same time. And so when we go to confession, for example, we don't confess having bad thinking, right? You don't say, Father, I used to refer to the Trinity as 3 people. Now I know it's 3 persons. Wow, was I wrong? Give me a penance for that. There's no penance for that. Just get a bad grade on your catechism. They do that. That's sin, right? And so, what kind of consequences does that have down the line? Oh, there's all kinds. We don't have time to get into it as it unfolds, through history and in the church. So what do we do, though, as Franciscans? Let's bring it practical. So we're Franciscans. Father Mike convinced us, the will is primary over the intellect. Love is more important than truth. So what? We go back to my family, my parish, my neighborhood. So what? Well, maybe you won't get an immediate so what. Leave home. You go home to Gus and say, hey, honey, guess what? The truth is, well, maybe this would be an example. Now I'm thinking out loud. You go home to your spouses, those of you who have spouses or partners. And just look back at how many times have you thought your spouse was a complete idiot? TMI here, right? Oh, man. How did I end up with that one? You roll over in bed and you look at your beloved and think, you again? Really? Till death do us part? Oh, really? But you love them. You love them. You have children. Children demand an awful lot from their parents. These are your teachers. Kids just suck all of the energy out of you. If you got a classroom full of kids, it's just exhausting. And then if you go home to kids of your own at home and say, "Can I never leave these children? I got them at home. I got them at work. I got them everywhere." They just like suck it out of you. Yeah, that's kenosis. That is self-emptying. Right? And it's not about being hard on yourself. It's not about killing yourself, not taking care of yourself. No, that's not about that. It's about what are the things that you freely allow to call forth from you, not out of compulsion or, psychological addiction or something like that, but out of love, out of freely chosen love for the sake of the betterment of the other and the larger community. When I do that, then I am getting closer to God. And I might learn some truths along the way, some, capital T truths, thanks to our Dominicans who are teaching us, right? And that's important to do. As I said, I'm a teacher now a lot. But in the end, it's not what you know, it's what you desire. And the question for us, this is where Lent conversion looks different for us and why Franciscans really got it in Lent. Whatever you desire, remember, desire is the function of the will, right? Is it worthy of your desire? Ask yourself, where's my heart geared? Where are my passions geared? And wherever it's going, this person, this activity, this project, this whatever it is this, which is the object of my desire, worthy of my desire? Not am I worthy of it. Is it worthy of me? Is it worthy of my self-emptying?
Can you talk a little bit about us being brothers and sisters of penance and how penance relates to this turning, this emptying?
Yes, penance is perfect because penance is not about punishment.
I didn't read that for a long time.
Yeah, penance, we say, Father, give me a penance, and then we think, if I haven't been to confession for 35 years, I'm going to get like 90,000 rosaries to pray. I'll never get done, right? So penance is not punishment. Penance is an outward sign of turning around. Penance is an outward sign of conversion. Right? It's not just a matter of, having some emotional turnaround or some enlightenment, which is important, right? Mm-hmm. But penance is the outward sign. So when you go to confession, you get a penance as some outward sign, some kind of sign that you acknowledge that God has been good to you, and you're going to turn around. Right? That's what penance is. So the Franciscans are a penitential order. They were the brothers of penance. The order of the penance. And it didn't mean walking around, smacking yourself with the rope all the time. Although, there was a time in the friaries, Father Tony and Tony will tell you about that, on Fridays, they had to go to their rooms in the big monasteries and keep their doors open and kneel down at their bedside, take their hood off because you didn't want the hood to protect your back from the knots, and you had to sit there and say Psalm 51 out loud in Latin while the superior walked the halls and made sure nobody was being too light on himself. I'm not making that up. This is in the lifetime of the old men that are in this house.
Wow.
That is not penance, although it's beginning to hurt like hell. But then the thing is, yeah, not so bad. But the friars would say, but the guardian would walk around because every now and then the guys, instead of smacking their backs, they'd be smacking the mattress of the bed. Because it's pretty much the same. And if the superior saw you doing that, if he was going to be a real mean superior, he'd get you more in trouble. But if he wasn't so mean, he'd just yell in there, the back, not the bed. Oh, sorry, Father. But he knew, Yeah. So again, to be in a penitential order doesn't mean to, and Francis at the end of his life apologized to his body, calling a brother ass, and I mistreated you. And, at the end of his life, he told the friars, don't do what I did, find your own way, right? That sort of thing. So it was not about this rigorous, and keep in mind, this is the Middle Ages, where that kind of stuff was not uncommon, right? So when you read the toughness of the Franciscan, the writings of St. Francis, especially his rule to the friars, look at how many times he makes an exception. Okay. Like he'll talk about the rules on fasting. You read the first order rule. The rules on fasting. The friars fast from this time to this time. They got like a week off. Then another one starts. Oh my gosh, they're always fasting. But he'll say something like, for those who are able, or those who cannot can do this. Things like that. Little merciful caveats. And there's stories, like I was just preparing for today. The story about, the friars are fasting. There's a young brother who was like really, really hungry. You wake up in the middle of the night. Oh, I'm dying, I'm so hungry. And so Francis gets up and says, well, I'll have a feast. Come on, let's make a party. And they get all the food in the middle of the night. They had this big dinner, whatever, And the friars said, wait, we thought we were fasting, And Francis said, because I didn't want to embarrass him by letting him eat while we're all suffering. So we're all going to feast because he's at the end of his ropes. Right? So there's that. Right? Like at the first reading, I said, a superior, minister should not compel in obedience something that is against the soul of the person he's compelling. Right? So if it's against your soul, okay, because if you're obeying out of duress, that's not that, because it's not love, because it's not free. Right? At the heart of love is freedom. And so when we look at the problem of evil in the world, right? The problem of evil is because love has to be free, and sometimes it's not given. And God accepts this as the cost of loving, that sometimes love will not be loved back. Isn't that a phrase of St. Francis? He's weeping, like, because he's Italian and he's a hippie, right? He's always weeping, sighing, all this, right? And why are you weeping, Brother Francis? Because love is not loved. Remember that little story? I'm weeping because love is not loved. That is the heart and the nub of this primacy of the will over the intellect. Love needs to be loved. Right? Love is the object of our desire. We need to love. And when we love, we are that part of creation that is loving God back. We are part of that sort of rush back into God. Our prayer then, when we're in sort of contemplative prayer, is being aware of the fact that we are part of this rushing out of God and into God, and out of God and into God, and out of God and into God. It's constant. Whatever we have that's resisting that, that's putting the brakes on a bit, right? That's the part of us that doesn't want to allow God to pull us back into Him. It's not us doing the loving, right? It's God loving Himself through us. And when we got the brakes on, and God is saying, let go of the brakes. Let go. Let me guide you in the cosmic return back to myself. Just let go. That's kenosis, that letting go, right? Now, we don't let go of all human responsibilities. Not like I come back from confessions and the dishes aren't done because I just let go of that. No, I just let go. I just went home. It's not that. Any other questions that I want to wrap up with a concluding remark and then kind of set us on our afternoon? Because I hope I gave you some kind of image for your prayer, right? For the rest of your quiet time, to kind of let go, not let go irresponsibly, but let go of what's keeping you from really surrendering to this dynamic of God loving Himself back through us, so to speak. Francis said, hold back nothing of yourself for yourselves, so that he who gives himself completely might be received by you. Isn't that one more time? Hold back nothing of yourself for yourselves, so that he who gives himself completely may be received by you. Hold back nothing of yourself for yourselves.
What does that actually mean? Let go of all kind of possessions?
It could be possessions. For Francis, he didn't want possessions.
Or what does it mean?
It means a different thing for each person. You need to ask yourself in your life, what am I clinging to selfishly? There's nothing wrong with having possessions. There is something wrong with possessions having you. Right? That can be a problem. Right?
It's just desires that let go of our desires?
No, you don't let go of desire. You orient your desire.
Well, then you really haven't answered me.
What do you let? I don't know what in your particular. You might need to let go of some possessions if these are possessions that are keeping you from being loving. You might need to let go of some idea that is not a helpful idea anymore. For example, we have our culture has to let go of certain ideas about certain people, for example. I'll get it out of the personal and make it social, right? Our culture needs to let go of certain ideas about other people that helps us see them as terrible people that we need to hate. And as long as we hold on to this idea that other people are worthy of our hate, then we are not able to love. We're not able to be like God. It's something that's holding us back collectively, and it's holding me back as long as I have those ideas about those people. See, so maybe it's not possessions. It's easier to give up possessions than it is to give up harmful ideas. Because we've been raised in ideas, possessions come and go. I have a garage sale and those possessions are gone. I go to Goodwill, the possessions are gone. But my hatred, my bigotry, my racism, that's deep inside. And maybe I don't give that up. Maybe I have to have it yanked away from me. Maybe I have to have it torn away from me. Maybe I have to have somebody tell me what an idiot I am for thinking this. And I have to accept that they're right and I'm wrong. Because it's getting in the way of love. It's not a matter about being right or wrong. As long as we're arguing about right and wrong, intellectually, right, truth and not truth, then we'll be stuck, right? Is fill in the blank group actually sinister and evil or not? Well, you can say, well, they are. Look at all these hateful things they do. Look at all these violent things they do. Look at all these awful things they do. Look at all these examples. Well, no, but it's not the full example. We can have an argument back and forth. That's what we're doing now. We're arguing, right, about stuff that can never be proven anyway. If the level of the intellect, both sides can be right, and they can dig in, and then their emotions follow their thoughts, and then we're fighting. But what if the answer is different? What if the question is different? What if we ask the question not as a Dominican, what is truth and not truth about fill in the blank group that we're all supposed to hate? What if the question is, what does our desire lead us to when we think of these other people? What does our heart yearn for when we think of this group that we're supposed to hate? Does our heart desire what? What is the letting go that I need to do? This kenosis, right? This not grasping. What needs to happen so that we end up not in violence?
Loving.
Well, love, yeah, but what? Love doesn't mean affection. Now your answer will be a different answer. But I would say, one thing is we need to let go of how maybe we've been shaped to think about fill in the blank group we're supposed to hate. And I say fill in the blank because people have different things in their blanks, right? So maybe what I need to do is to be free to love more because there's something in me that's clinging me to hate. And I need to find what that is and ask God to help me let go of it.
Well, hate is taught. People are taught to hate.
Yes, we are.
It's not usually come within us. We were born to be like that.
Hate is taught, so we need to look at what do I hate? Who do I hate? Just like we have to say what is when I say desire leads to love. We need to make sure that our desire is geared toward that which is worthy of our love. Well, it's okay to say, and the things we hate, is that worthy of our hate? Is it deserving of our hate? Because hate is the opposite of love, right? So, and if we keep orienting our desires toward that which we hate, then we become what we hate. Right? If the whole dynamic of the Trinity is we should become what we love, right? So the more we love, the more we desire God, which is love, the more we'll become like God, because we'll let go, allow God to help us let go of that which keeps us from love.
So the more we love, the less we hate.
Well, yeah, more or less. You said more or less, I said more or less, right? It's not a matter of more or less, it's a matter of this surrender, this letting go and having God help us to let go. So we say, in our prayer, we say, Lord, I realize that there is a place, my desire is leading me in, toward hatred, toward this, whatever, right? I'm geared toward hatred here. And Lord, I don't want that. I'm feeling it. I'm honestly hateful about this situation, this whatever. Help me to know whether this is worthy of my heart. And if it's not, Lord, purify my heart. Help me let go, or take from me whatever is having me cling to this which I hate, which has a power over me. Because hatred has a power too, doesn't it? Right? Hatred has a power. And we feel ourselves powerless before these hatreds sometimes. Right? right? And we need to ask God to wrench us from that, even if it hurts. Sometimes it hurts a lot. I cannot keep hating this person. I cannot keep hating this group. I cannot keep hating this thing, unless it's worthy of my hate. I hate violence. I abhor violence of any kind. And if I find myself being violent in words, I feel terrible about myself. The last time I was violent to any person, well, there was this once. I won that one. Yes, Carol.
Father, can you say that one more time? Hold back nothing of yourself.
For yourselves.
For yourself.
So that he who gives himself completely may be received by you.
Thank you.
Listening to your talk, just the other day, I was talking with my granddaughter. She's in college studying philosophy, sociology, all these different subjects, and theology. And after several hours of just discussion back and forth, no problems of the world resolved or anything, just bouncing ideas and thoughts, she said, maybe the answer to everything is just so simple, but as complicated people, we can't see it, and that's why we keep screwing up. And I looked at her and I said, holy cow, where did you read that? She said, I didn't, I just thought of it now. Okay, and I have no answer, and neither did she. Maybe the answer is so simple. Love.
Love.
Desire
Yeah, love.
is the answer, and it's so simple. Not easy, but simple. We can't see it.
And that's why
because we
St.
want it
Francis is so
complicated.
popular, because he captured it, not so much in words, he had beautiful little words from time to time, but it was the example of his life.
Yeah.
You know, people saw in him what it was. Oh, I can do this, or at least I can be inspired to be more like this. None of us is perfectly there. I don't want to be anti-intellectual,
No.
you know, because sometimes people say, oh, smart people make things complicated, and so therefore complicated things are dumb. No, that's not true, right? But in the end, it does come down to love. But the Dominicans would say, but how do you know it's love? Right? Truth is truth. I mean, to their defense, is truth is truth. Truth is knowable. And truth doesn't change. So love is this squishy thing, you know. Truth is bedrock, solid, unchangeable, static. Truth can be known. You got to know it. Once you know it, there it is, right? And so if somebody says, well, this is truth, this is not truth, it's clear. Be a Dominican answer to all of this, right? They say, you know, hippie Franciscans, right? Love, you know. And our answer is, this is where we need to use our brains as well as our hippie St. Francis, right? And say, yes. And here is what love is. Pattern on the Trinity. Known as, in the pattern of self-emptying. Self-emptying kenosis within the Trinity of God himself, who is a community of persons in perfect loving relationship. One emptying oneself into the other, eternally before creation. Right? This is a dogma. Right? Whether you're Franciscan or a Dominican, that's a dogma. And patterned on that, God who freely chose to create out of love. Therefore, everything that's created is patterned on him, who is love, who is community, who is relationship. Therefore, our community, our relationships need to also be patterned on the pattern of the Trinity, who is love, persons in community in kenotic, self-emptying, other-oriented relationships to each other. That is love. Not everything is love. Love is not the puppy licking your face or buying chocolates for your boyfriend. Right? That's not what we mean by love. You know, this kind of Franciscan love. Love is this kenotic, self-emptying love of one person to another person, so much that it creates a community. And the community of love is our pattern for love. Anything that gets in the way of self-emptying is like what untruth is in the world of seeking truth. Whatever is self-aggrandizing, self-apportioning, self-clinging, self-appropriating is the opposite of love. Just like lies are the opposite of truth. And so we would say as Franciscans to our Dominican cousins, love is not just any old thing. Love has a specific pattern rooted in the Trinity. So we're being dogmatic here. We're not just like being, make up our own religion kind of people, right? Rooted in the Trinity. Love has a specific pattern. And you want to know what love looks like in human flesh, like in the actual flesh of a human being? Look at Jesus Christ. We follow Jesus not because he is revealing truths to us. We were talking about this over lunch. Whoever converts to religion because suddenly they've gotten this intellectual clarity about the meaning of the relationship between the cosmos and human reality? Nobody. Who gets converted because they see an example of selfless love in another person? They say, I want to be like that if I can. Right? That's what brings people to God. And yes, we have intellectual truths, and I've been training them, I love teaching them. But you don't come to Jesus by learning the catechism. Right? You come to Jesus by being inspired by this love of God revealed in the particular pattern of Jesus Christ, who is hard to follow. It's not easy. And Francis is an example of somebody who followed Jesus radically and suffered a lot. Right? So it's not easy. And we fall short. Okay, we fall short then. And we got to keep doing penance.
When you're talking, I'm thinking of the life of Francis. And when he had that conversion in 1209 or whatever, I think he vowed at that point he was not going to let anything stop him from unity with Jesus. And he spent the next 20 years of his life just removing and releasing every single freaking obstacle he had. Yes. And it was hard as hell. That's my opinion.
It was really hard. I mean, and yet he wrote his Canticle of the Creatures at the very end when he was blind and bleeding and dying and in pain. And he writes the most beautiful lyric poem in the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. He was free of that, right? He was free. And Brother Elias freeing him even of his own will to control the way he dies. Right? And that's perfect. That's perfect. Giving up everything. Even, remember, at the end, he didn't give up his will. It was taken from him. Which is like the perfect freedom. I didn't have to give it up. It was yanked from me, right? But you're right. For Francis, it was very hard.
Oh, it's hard as hell.
Can you imagine living with Francis? Oh my gosh. If Francis wanted to join your order, I'd turn him down. Who wants to live with you? I don't want to live with you. Go join the Capuchins or something. Yeah. So I'm not trying to describe something that's like easy and, but no, it's a particular Franciscan focus and approach, right? And it's just hard sometimes as a Franciscan in the church today to make the case about what this is, because we've all been raised to learn the truths of the catechism and to teach truths and come to truth. And if you're making an error in your thinking, get your thinking corrected and all the rest of that. And I have no problems with it, but that's not how we come to Jesus. Think, oh, now I understand what transubstantiation really is. Now I'll love Jesus. No, that's not how that works. When you go to communion, are you thinking as you're going up the aisle, okay, transubstantiation is two categories of being, and the appearance remains the same, but the inner reality and the divine order of the cosmos changes at the words when the Father. No, you're just talking to the Lord. Lord, help me to receive you, help me know you, be with me, Lord. Whatever you said, that's what you're doing. Okay? You're loving Jesus as you come to receive him in the Eucharist. You're not going through this. Oh, transubstantiation, really? You don't go up there when the priest or minister says the body of Christ, go, wait a minute, I don't know if I think transubstantiation is the right phrase here. No, I can't do this yet. You don't do that. I'm making light of doctrine. but even still, the doctrine, the words of the doctrine are not the doctrine. The words point to a truth. The words point to a reality that's bigger than the words. Right? I mean, we have to use words to describe what we're doing, even when I'm using words to talk about love. Right? That's why I'm doing this with my hands. Right? Because at some level, although we need words, we're human beings, we communicate with words, right? And flesh and everything. This is what we have to. This is why we're made. This is how we do it. But we realize as soon as we use words to describe something divine, already the words are weak. the thing we're describing is always bigger than our words. As long as we realize that, our words cannot capture the totality of it. They just sort of point us in the direction, and we let our minds and hearts fill up the rest, right? So then we're good. As long as we think that my words are the totality of what I'm trying to describe, now we're in trouble. And speaking of trouble, I used up most of my time I was going to use for confessions, right? And I really have to get the confessions for the kids. So, sorry, they might be bigger sinners than y'all. So but I'm encouraging you to spend a little time. It's up to you now, okay? You have a minister here who can help guide. Do you want some time to talk, to sit quietly? Well, maybe you can all agree on a time. I think I would like you not to just leave and scatter, but that you kind of end it together somehow. So, and that the way to do that would be by praying a rosary together, which is a nice prayer you all can lead. So whether you want to do that, you pick a time. Everybody consensus says, yes, we'll pray this rosary in the chapel, and then we'll be done. And then, but whether you want some time before the rosary to kind of be quiet and whatever, it's all up to you. But thank you for this chance to dump my brain into your brains and to spend a little time in recollection. Blessed Lent.
Thank you,
Father. Don't forget to fill up the pot, and you're going to take this tomorrow. Okay. I'll leave these books here in case somebody wants to, write them down what they are.